Hi, everyone. Welcome to the virtual National Press Club Journalism Institute. I'm Jim Coonan, the Press Freedom Fellow at the Institute. Thank you for making the time to be here today for our program on strategies to obtain public records, particularly during the pandemic. And thank you to Miranda Spivack and Mark Walker for kindly joining us today. We're looking forward to a great conversation among our guests for the first half of the program, and then we'll open it up to your questions. Please share your questions using the Q&A queue. At the end of the program, we will send you an email with a survey and with links to a recording of the program and to the slides and tip sheets that Miranda and Mark will use during this event. Miranda is a veteran reporter and editor who specializes in stories about government accountability and state secrecy, and has conducted several workshops on open government issues for IRE, Lion, JAWS, and other journalism organizations. She's a journalism fellow at the Brechner Center for Freedom of Information at the University of Florida. She's a former reporter and editor at the Washington Post. Her series State Secrets for revealnews.org and USA Today about the rise in state and local government secrecy was a winner of the Society of Professional Journalists 2017 Sunshine Award. Mark is the FOIA coordinator for the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. Before joining the Times, he was a training director for investigative reporters and editors. And in 2016, as a watchdog reporter for the Argus Leader in Sioux Falls, he was named South Dakota Outstanding Young Journalist of the Year and won the South Dakota Newspaper Association's Public Service Reporting Award for a series on delays in mental competency evaluations for mentally ill criminal defendants. Mark was recently elected to IRE's Board of Directors. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jim.
I wanted to start, as journalists, we write many different types of stories. They all require reporting, and we all have approaches to different forms of reporting, but some of us feel quite intimidated or overwhelmed by public records requests. And accessing public records is not just for the investigative writer able to devote weeks, if not months, to a project. Every beat reporter should know how to make a FOIA query. So, Miranda, before you even file a request, what are the strategies you recommend?
Well, I think first of all, people need to think about what is out there already, so that you don't necessarily have to go through the formal FOIA or state Public Information Act request, depending on what your state law is. And so actually on the first slide, I have a little summary of things you ought to be able to get just routinely. If something is enforced, inspected, licensed, purchased, you can pretty much assume that there's a public record for that. And depending on the state or the city or the county, some of those public records may actually be online already. So, that's where I would start, is see what's out there, see how it's relevant to your work. A lot of online records are actually just, if you're a nerd like me, you just want to scroll through them. They're kind of fascinating. You may find story ideas there. We can go to the second slide now. So, but if you do decide that you've got to make a formal request, this is a list of some of the things that you ought to be able to get: data recordings, police videos, appointment calendars, which are always really interesting to see who the elected officials are meeting with, emails, texts. Congress and the judiciary in most states and the legislatures in a lot of states managed to exempt themselves from all of this. But there are still ways around it, because you can get communications from executive agencies to lawmakers if you go to the agency itself. So those are things to just think about that are out there. And then on the third slide, I wanted to make a point which maybe you think is harder now because of the pandemic and everybody is working from home. And actually, in the beginning of the pandemic, it was harder. I was having a lot of trouble getting people to respond to me. But now that people have sort of settled into their work at home routines, including state and local officials, I think they're actually craving contact. And so what I would do is, first of all, just basically get to know who holds on to the records, whether it's the court clerk, the county clerk, the agency administrative assistant. Ask them, get them on the phone, ask them what is generally available, how do they retain the records, how long are they available for, if there are fees and you're a journalist, see if you can get the fees waived because your reporting is considered in the public interest, which is something that most state laws and the federal FOIA do allow. And then also ask about regular reports that they make to the government or have to make to the federal government or have to make to their legislatures. Where are those reports, financial documents, contracts, bonds? I mean, there's so much you can get. And if you can get the people who are the gatekeepers to all of this to get to know you, even on the phone, or maybe they'll FaceTime or Zoom with you, a lot of times they'll just give it to you. The Genesee County clerk in Michigan told me recently, he said, I don't believe in FOIA. And I was like, uh-oh, what does that mean? And he said, no, you asked me for something, I'll just give it to you. And I was like, oh my God, this guy is like a breath of fresh air. So, you know, I would say try beat reporting again, even though we're doing it remotely. On the next slide. So these are also entities that, and you'll get these slides at the end, but things that you ought to be able to get. Public-private partnerships, the P3s, which are further down on the list, are really, really interesting. And a lot of states will try to hold those back because the private entity will say that this is, the information is a trade secret. But, you know, if it's being publicly funded, that's a good argument that it should be available to you. 911 records. Don't forget campaign finance reports this year on the state level as well as the federal level. Those are all out there. Go to the next slide. This is a little bit out of date, but as part of the State Secret series I did, this is a state-by-state menu for what you can get from each state. And again, we'll give that to you at the end. The next slide is about, okay, the privatization of public information. I mentioned that with the P3s, public-private partnerships. There's also a lot of information. Police departments are giving a lot of their data to LexisNexis or some subsidiary of it. And then they make it all into these pretty heat maps, and then they give it back to the police department. There's a delay and sometimes in the public getting that. And then the LexisNexis and Westlaw and other companies then sell that information. That's your tax-funded information. They sell that information to Walmart and other companies so that, you know, they can figure out where to put their stores or what kind of precautions they need to take. So this, again, is something that you really have to push back on and say, look, this is public, this is publicly funded, you should give it to me. Next slide. This is just a list of various organizations that will help you if you're a journalist, and I think there may be some non-journalists on this call, but if you're a journalist, Reporters Committee has a FOIA generator. They also have a legal group that might help you, SPJ, NFOIC, all these groups are willing to help you and you should reach out to them. Also the ACLU, which has a branch in every state, and they can often help you because some of these rejections that you may get are First Amendment issues. Last slide, I think. So, and this is a list of sample request letters that you can try to emulate. And I'm sure Mark also, even after this is over, when I've done some of these sessions, people often think of something after we've done this, you know, feel free to email me and I do respond to questions. So I hope that's helpful.
So Mark, as a reporter, we now generally know what we want to get. As Miranda said, we've identified and even gotten to know the FOIA compliance officer. What's next? Just file a big open-ended request and see what we get?
So no, I wouldn't particularly do that. So from this slide, you can take a look. Primarily, I do a lot of federal FOIA. So this slide basically shows the average, median, high and low end number of days it takes to get a FOIA to return from different offices. As you can see, the Bureau of Prisons takes an average of 15 days. But if you go to the Executive Office of the U.S. Attorney, it's on average 208 days for them to even get back a simple request. And when you get down to some of the more complex requests, it can take years to get them back. So the next step for you to do is to think of how you want to write this FOIA. I treat FOIA and public records requests just like any other reporting assignment. And the thing you want to do is be able to specifically walk that FOIA officer exactly to the records that you're looking for. Tell them the name of the records, where they're located, and what specifically you're looking for, and break them up. FOIA has three different tranches in the federal government. There's simple requests, there's complex requests. You want to try and stay in the simple bucket as often as possible, and that sometimes requires just additional reporting to just further and further refine the information you're looking for. Next slide. So FOIA, journalists do not make up the largest portion of FOIA. As you can see, businesses FOIA the federal government a lot. Nonprofits, news media make up about 7.6% of all requests filed to the federal government. So when you're filing a FOIA and you're wondering why it's taken so long to get a response back, it's because that agency is likely getting a ton of responses, a ton of requests from, outside entities that aren't journalists. Next slide. So before you file your request, you ask yourself what you're looking for. So public records request, it applies to documents, not information. Like you can't get a question answered through FOIA. You can't pose a question to a FOIA officer. So you have to you can't say, does this document exist? If you send a FOIA request asking if a document exists to a FOIA officer, they will send you a reply that says this is not a FOIA or a public records request, and they'll immediately deny the request. And the bad part about that is sometimes you won't hear back for 2 weeks that your request wasn't a properly written request. So that had been 2 weeks that already passed in time for writing your story to get back. So only requested documents. A lot of federal websites have e-reading rooms, which is good and bad. For me, sometimes if I'm trying to get a FOIA request back and I just want my specific FOIA to be filled and not post on the website, it can be tough sometimes to see them get an email saying, hey, we're just going to post your documents on the website. But then it's also helpful because if a lot of reporters are looking for the same information, the DOJ does this a lot. They will just post it in their FOIA reading room. And the last tip is do your homework. Know exactly what you're looking for. I've FOIA'd for hospital inspection records dozens of times. And one of the things that's helped me be successful in getting those FOIAs to return is doing the research on CMS's website to know that there's a specific name for the type of form that they use for an inspection. It's 2518 form. And so when I file a records request with CMS, whether it's for inspection reports at a nursing home or a hospital or a mental health hospital, I go to CMS and I say, I specifically want the name of this document. And that request, even if I'm asking for thousands of pages or thousands of those requests, it ends up in the simple bucket because I described to the T the exact document I'm looking for from that FOIA officer. Next slide. I'm formulating the records. Be specific, be clear, be human. The person on the other end of your FOIA request is someone who is going to have to read it, interpret it, and try to make sense of what you're asking for. So you want to make sure that you be as clear and concise as possible. I always say put yourself in that FOIA officer's shoes. And if that were you trying to go look for those records, what would you want to know to make this as clear, quick, and easy as possible? Um, I like to call the FOIA officers a lot and just talk to them and about my requests, other requests, how their day is going, um, just to sort of build sort of a human relationship with them. I've done that with a number of federal agencies like the Department of Treasury. I call them and talk to them all the time. They think I filed maybe 20 FOIAs with the Department of Treasury within the first month of me being here, and I talked to them so much on the phone that they laughed and joked how I'm now the top requester for the agency. And anytime that I have an issue or they have a misunderstanding with any FOIA request that I submit, they immediately pick up the phone and call me and say, "Hey, Mark, we got your FOIA request. Can you explain to us what you mean by this?" So just taking that extra time to sort of build a relationship and talk to the FOIA officers will go tremendously a long way in sort of like the comprehension of your FOIA. If you don't take that step, a lot of times you will get a response back to where it says, you did not reasonably describe the records you were looking for. And what's unfortunate about that is that can restart your entire FOIA process. You can wait a few months to get a FOIA response filled just to get a letter that said you didn't reasonably respond and have to go through possibly an appeal process or refiling the request from the ground up and restarting that process. Keywords, names of custodian of records who you're looking for, date ranges, domain names, those are key components to FOIA requests. A lot of things that I see, especially when I'm working with reporters here, is they'll file a request and say, I want all, Mnuchin's emails since he started at the Department of Treasury. The Department of Treasury is going to pretend that that records request doesn't exist, never fill it, and then like in a year come back and say, this is too broad. We're not going to fill this. So I always ask the reporters, okay, if you want his emails, what specifically do you want from there? Are there any keywords, any things that if we put in this request, they'll hit on what you're looking for a story? And then they'll say, well, banking or loans or something like that. It's like, okay, that's something we work with. We can write a request that says, we're looking for all Mnuchin's emails over, a 3-month period containing the following keywords, and we'll list them down. That's a narrow request that would get you out of the complex bin and get your request turned over in a more timely fashion. Format of the records request. When you're filing a records request, one of the most important things to take up that will save you a ton of times is what sort of format you want your response to be. Whether you want it to be any sort of mapping tool files or an Excel spreadsheet or anything like that, try and be explicit and tell them not to send you a PDF. There is no Microsoft PDF, so all the documents you get will exist in another form. So if you're asking for data, an agency will send you a PDF of a spreadsheet. I've gotten 2,000 pages for a spreadsheet that were PDF, and I had to spend, hours and hours of the course of my week trying to un-PDF the spreadsheet. But explicitly telling them that I want this in a specific format saves me a lot of time. I also put in there the response time. Different states and federal agencies have a statutory limit of time when they can respond to your request. I make sure I include that, let them know, and I follow up once that time comes by. Always include a fee waiver, ask for waiver fees. And expedite processing is probably the most important one of these because it is the sort of third bucket of a federal response. And this is the way that you get your FOIA requests filled ahead of others. Each agency sort of has a mechanism to where it will allow you, the reporter, to make an argument as to why they should process your FOIA ahead of anyone else's. And this is the section of your FOIA request you should spend the most time crafting. Next slide. So for expedited processing, the agency has 10 days to get back to you. to respond on whether they will approve or deny your argument of expedited processing. There's two bases to whether you can make an argument for expedited processing: that there's an imminent threat to life or safety of a person, or there's an urgency to inform the public of federal government activities. One of the mistakes that I see commonly during doing FOIA requests and working with reporters in the Times on FOIA requests is their expedited processing argument will be, I'm a reporter at the New York Times and I'm writing about this and I'm going to inform it, so you should give me expedited processing. And that always, always, always gets denied. That is never a good argument as to why you should get expedited processing. If you want expedited processing, my recommendation is you tie it to a news event. You tie it to whether it's the Mueller report, whether it's the Boeing crashes or a school shooting or something. You take it and you tie it to a news event for why you should get expedited processing. Doing this, I have gotten I've filed maybe 4 FOIA requests with the CIA, and like I've spent days just researching and writing expedited processing arguments, and so far I'm 4 for 4. When those records will arrive, I don't know, but I know I will get them in probably 2 years instead of like 6 or 7. Next slide. So this is just a slide where I mentioned tie your request to a concrete event. Don't forget to certify your statements. Make sure, like the FBI has a section of their FOIA request where it says, do you certify these statements are true? Make sure you always do that, and appeal. You can always appeal expedited processing. There's no guarantee that you will get it. I've made some of the best expedited processing arguments I've thought. I've even had a call from a FOIA officer who told me that, hey, that was a great argument, but we're just not going to give it to you. And then I would have to appeal that FOIA officer's decision. So always, always, always appeal. Timing of the agency's response. Sort of ask for an estimated date of completion. That is always one of the things that I've asked for of all the FOIA officers. So if I'm working on a story or working on a project, I can have a sense of when I should expect to get these records. Federal FOIA officers are required to try and give you some semblance of an estimated date of completion. And I always take that date and I log it and keep it and say, okay, this is the day they said they were going to complete the request. I'll start working on my story. I'll plan on retrieving the documents this way. That is a key component I would also make sure that I keep in all of my FOIA requests. Next slide. Format and fees. Again, just making sure that you impress upon the agency the importance of providing you the documents in the format that you're looking for, and making sure that you also write out a really detailed response for a fee waiver, especially with some of these online forms that you have to go to a online portal to submit a request. You'll see maybe 4 or 5 different fee categories. Read those categories as closely as possible, because some of them will say, well, the agency will produce the first 100 pages for free, and then you'll have to incur any cost after that. Or we'll do 2 hours of research, and then any additional hours you'll have to pay for it. Just make sure you read those fee categories as closely as possible, and make sure that, no, you're looking for the specific fee waiver that applies to news media, and you want those fees waived. The only agency that will never, for some odd reason, give you a fee waiver is HUD. But do not panic. They always deny fee waiver requests, but go back on the backside for journalists and always waive the fees. So if you've ever FOIA'd HUD and HUD has said, we deny your fee waiver, do not panic. They're not going to charge you for the documents that you're going to get. So this is sort of the FOIA tracker that I use, and several other people at the New York Times use to sort of keep track of FOIA requests that we file. So we have one column for the date that it's filed. They have another column for the agency, sort of the level or sub agency within, or the underarching agency within that federal agency. The request, sort of a description of the request that I filed, the FOIA number that I got back, and status to keep me updated on when did I receive an acknowledgement letter? When did they tell me there was going to be an estimated date of completion? Has it been 20 days since I filed this request? Did they deny the request? Did they come back to me and say they had no records? So this is this data tracking spreadsheet that I just use to make sure I keep and stay on top of all the requests that I file in the Times. I file hundreds of requests, probably a month, and it's a nightmare in my email inbox to try and keep up with, but having the spreadsheet allows me to go back and look at some of those things and keep track of the FOIA responses that I have. So I just have a few examples of stories you can do from public records requests. About 2 months ago, myself and several colleagues worked on a story about the CDC's response to the coronavirus. And one of the FOIA strategies we implemented here was, okay, the CDC is probably going to get flooded with tons, if not hundreds, if not thousands of FOIA requests asking for documents related to the coronavirus. What can we do to get documents related to this in a more timely fashion, more relevant, just really quickly? So the decision was made to sort of, I said, why don't I file public records requests to all 50 states, every governor's office, every health department, every office of economic development. And instead of FOIAing the CDC for their communications, FOIA the states with any communications they've had with the CDC. And I filed all these requests back with every state. Some states were cooperative, some states weren't. And we ended up collecting over 22,000 pages of records that we used to tell this story. Next slide. Federal FOIA. This was an investigation that I worked on with myself and our DHS reporter, and we wanted to examine the federal government's, how much aid had been given Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands following Hurricane Maria and Irma. So we thought through, how do we want to tell this story? And after researching, we learned that FEMA actually tracks the aid they give out to different states per storm. So for every storm that happens, no matter the number of states or places it touches, FEMA has a database that keeps track of that. Then we found out it actually was several databases. So we ended up filing about 7 or 8 FOIA requests to basically collect these different pieces of information, pieces of data that FEMA had on any sort of disaster declaration, and basically built out a methodology to measure the agency's response for Hurricane Maria and Irma compared to other states. And we use that with FOIA, and we sort of the same way use the spreadsheet and say we file it this day. We're going to ask for expedited processing. They say they were going to produce it this day. We're going to work on other stuff and then come back to this and sort of finalize it once these records started coming in. And then we were able to finish this investigation that showed, how just slow this response was compared to places that were hit on the mainland. And this was a story that was done by my colleague, Eric Lipton, that was the result of a FOIA lawsuit. I believe he put this FOIA in 2018. This story didn't run until 2020. And it actually was based off, he put the FOIA in based off a tip that he got. The FOIA sort of dragged on. And once he finally came back around to the story in 2019, he reached out to our attorneys and had us promptly file a lawsuit to get these records returned. And the lawsuit, I think it took a few months basically to get the State Department of Transportation to produce records related to Elaine Child's family's business dealings. And he was able to take those records from the FOIA lawsuit and turn those over to a story. So that's also an option. And there are a ton of different groups, media groups around who will help you and assist you in lawsuits in case you don't have counsel at your news organization to do it, who will, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press will happily take up a FOIA lawsuit for something like this, to produce a story like this. So if you think you're going to go the litigation route, that's something you should think up ahead of time before putting the FOIA, and sort of take the proper steps and planning to go down that route. And again, these are just some additional resources you can use when filing your FOIAs.
Miranda, you had a quick question for you. You worked on that state secrets project. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you identified the areas that you wanted to explore, and how you decided which state agencies. You had, of course, 50 states. How did you decide which agencies would provide you information, two, had problems that you wanted to identify?
So that series looked at a couple of different things. One was the whole trade secrets exemption, which is both a federal, and every state except Massachusetts has it written into their FOIA law. And so it's a very common excuse that public agencies will use. You know, you want the bus contract, and then they go back to the bus company and say, the bus company says, oh, no, we can't give those details because those are all trade secrets and we're going to tip off our competitors. So just looking at government contracts was something I was very, very interested in. And, you know, the government's contract with everything now. The trash pickup is contracted out. Bus, you know, sometimes school bus drivers are contracted out. There's all kinds of stuff. So just the general idea of public contracts was very interesting to me. Police videos, and I wrote that series in 2016 and 2017. And then, you know, the Obama administration had spent $40 million giving police departments video cameras for dash cam and body cams. And supposedly the idea was to make the police activity more transparent, but that we knew already back then was not the case. And in fact, they were being withheld as the videos were being withheld as investigative tools and part of an ongoing investigation. So I wanted to look at that because that's also a very common loophole in state FOIA laws. And basically, I mean, you know, some of it was just sort of interesting anecdotes that I came upon, mostly bread and butter issues, like a guy who wanted to get a turning light in Maryland, where I live, and because there had been all these accidents near this high school. And so he goes to the state government, the state transportation office, to try to get copies of their studies of that intersection and, you know, just how they had made their decision to keep turning him down for this turning light. And, you know, bumps into this huge loophole that actually Congress had given the states about not having to declare which are the most dangerous intersections in their state as a way to protect them against lawsuits for negligence. So, I mean, you know, I was really trying to look at bread and butter issues, and they're all over the place. I mean, there are just tons of them that you can write about, and that somehow will bump up against state and local FOIA.
Thanks. We're getting some questions. Jordan Smith asks that, Miranda, you mentioned that government sell data, and Jordan,
yeah, I saw that question. I think that either I misspoke or that was misunderstood. What I was saying was that in the case of police agencies, they give the data, their raw data, to something like LexisNexis, which then turns it into a heat map and something else that the police departments can use. That goes back. What happens is that they're giving away the data to LexisNexis, which can then resell it to private companies. So it isn't the government selling it, although that may occur, but it's really creating a good out of your tax-funded, you know, material that you paid for, giving it to a company and they're reselling it. That's what I was talking about.
I see. And Mark, any suggestions for this question? A freelancer trying to pry information from a public university system, FOIAs haven't been answered, and can't even get a PIO on the phone. Any advice?
I like to send emails and CC a lot of people on it when that happens, and it usually gets people's attention. I will send an email, and I've done this with even federal agencies, and I've had to do this with universities. I would look for the directory of emails, and I'll send an email, and I'll CC the president, the vice president, the PIO's boss, and the general counsel for the university. And I will send an email, and I will have all of them on it, and I will say, hey, I'm trying to get this FOIA answer. Does anybody want to help me out? And that's usually going to frustrate someone enough to where they are going to respond to you or get you some sort of response. Like some people get upset because it's like, why'd you have to put my boss on this email? And I usually respond, why did you have to go weeks without replying to me? And that's usually a way to flush people out. And I don't use it too often, but I use it enough when someone is like, I feel like they're deliberately ignoring me and they have a boss.
Let me just add to that. I actually have got a grant from the Fund for Investigative Journalism, and the story is coming out imminently about public universities and how adept they are at hiding information, usually using third parties to do it for them. I would just add to what Mark said, send it to the regents because they are political appointees and some of them will not like this.
Yeah, much of that information is particularly having to do with campus crime, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Campus crime, you know, donations that say you must hire this professor, things like that.
Yeah. Once, another question from Cal Price, once someone successfully makes a FOIA request, is the discovered material accessible to the public more so than it was before, or is it up to the requester to decide whether to make that information public in some fashion, which I know some FOIA requesters do?
Depends. Mark mentioned reading rooms. You know, so federal agencies in particular will put their stuff online. States, it varies. Anyway, you should also be aware that once you make a FOIA request, that's a public document. So other journalists, other people can see what you're asking for.
I had a question for both of you. I may have mentioned it to you when we did prep. You filed a FOIA request. You understand roughly how long it might take. And during the course of that waiting period, you continue to do reporting, which brings you to different data that you might want to request. Do you have to file a separate request for that? Can you amend your request? And does it start the clock ticking all over again?
You can amend it. It just depends on how much you're tweaking it. If you are, let's say you're asking for a database and through the course of your reporting, you've realized that maybe there's some portions of that database you want and others you don't, you can call that FOIA officer back and say, I actually want to narrow my request. I want you to exclude this and include this. And a lot of times FOIA officers are really responsive to that. And I'm like, great, I can 100% do that. I can 100% work with that. Adding things, I think it depends. It's on a case by case basis, because if the FOIA officer thinks that you are adding too much, they may make you file a separate request. Or if they are thinking you are adding something, instead of that, they may say, well, do you want this instead of this? It may be a trade-off to where you cancel out your original request in exchange for this. So you have to sort of weigh that value.
I think also it helps immensely, as Mark and I both mentioned, to really know this FOIA officer. I spent a year getting information from the executive office that in the Department of Justice that oversees immigration judges. But the lawyer he really tried hard to help me. And once they thought they came up with what I wanted and it wasn't what I wanted, I called him back and I said, no, this is not it. The guy went out and found it immediately. There was no formal amending of anything. I cannot emphasize enough, as Mark has too, personal relationships with these folks. And you can make those even at the federal level. You can definitely make that happen.
There's a question specifically on how to focus keywords in a FOIA. How do you avoid leaving out a keyword that could help catch a specific email or document you're seeking? And is there any limit to the number of keywords you use in a request? And I'd add to that, can you use a kind of a Boolean style of search, i.e., this but not that, or a keyword followed by asterisks to fill out the request in that fashion to catch more of what you might be looking for?
Nope, there is no limits to the number of keywords that you can put in. I think when I was doing those state COVID requests, I had 40 plus keywords. One of the key things to include in your request to make sure you don't miss anything is when you're writing and you say you would like emails or records containing any of the following keywords, I always put any one, and I put one in all caps because some FOIA officers would interpret that if an email doesn't contain all of the keywords you listed, then you don't want it. And so you may get a response that says no responsive record, and then you'll be confused, like, I know there's something there, there's no way it's possible. But explicitly saying any one tells them that even if it's one email that's related or not related and it has the keyword coronavirus or virus in it, I would like it. Also, you can do that with your Boolean sort of request. So sometimes I say coronavirus and testing, coronavirus and traffic. In Florida for requests, I use a lot of things like coronavirus and beach, because using beach as a keyword alone, there's a lot of cities with beach in its name. So when I filed out to the Florida Health Department, they were kind of like, well, do you know how many cities, Miami Beach, Florida, there's tons of places that are going to have beach in it. So I said, fine, anything that has coronavirus and beach in the same email, give it to me. And that sort of narrowed that down and sort of made sure I didn't miss anything in those emails.
Okay. Well, we're reaching the end of our program, sadly. There are other questions that I will share with you. And if you have some answers, you can email us back, and we'll share them with our guests and audience. But for now, I'd just like to say thank you so very much for your time and insight this morning. This could go on for much longer, but out of respect for everyone's time, we'll have to stop there. If we didn't get to your question, as I said, we'll share it with our panelists and pass along any responses along to you. The Journalism Institute is here to help during this challenging time. We've waived all registration fees for programming since March in light of the pandemic. We're hoping you'll give our work a thumbs up with a donation in support of learning like this. And we hope you'll complete the survey that we will send you about your experience so that we can design programs that you and other journalists need most. So you'll receive an email with the survey, links to the recording of this program, and links to the slides and tip sheets that Mark and Miranda have so kindly shared with us. So please stay well. And thank you all again for being here. And we hope to see you again soon. And again, Miranda, Mark, terrific program. And thanks so much for your time.
No, thanks for having us.
Thank you.